I'm getting ready to begin the competitions for the Computer Olympia. They're held virtually this year. And I just want to talk about how a lot of these computer games, when I first wrote them, they seemed like magic. I wrote my first computer program when I was 7 years old. I had my dad had given me this book. We used to have a used bookstore in our neighborhood, and we had picked up a book about programming in QBasic, which came with Windows. I think we were using Windows 3.1 at the time. And when I was a kid, one of my favorite math exercises to do was to add up all the integers from 1 up to 100, because I knew the answer was 5,050. And it was a good way for me to practice, to see if I could do the whole calculation without making a mistake. Eventually, I learned how to use an abacus as well. And I did that exercise on that, adding 1 to 100, and seeing if I could do the whole thing without making a mistake. I would get to the end, and I would say when I was a kid, half the time I got the right answer without a mistake somewhere in there. My heart would sink if I got to the end and I got anything other than 5,050. So by extension, when I first learned to program in QBasic, that was the very first program I ever wrote as well. So I wrote it up. I wrote a loop. I had to learn how to write loops. I had to learn about variables. And I ran the program. And the very first time I ran it, the computer said 0. And my heart sank big time. Because when I was doing it by hand or on the abacus and I got 5,038 or something like that, that was often something that I would get. My heart would sink badly, and now I'm getting 0. And in my mind, I thought I made big mistakes, right? Because the difference between 0 and 5,050 is just way too big, right? It's not a simple calculation error anymore, right? I was 7 years old at the time. I didn't know much about computer bugs. I just knew it was a big mistake, just because the difference was very big. I took another look at the code. I couldn't find it. I went to do something else to take my mind off of that. I distinctly remember I went downstairs to have dinner with my family, and I was very disappointed. You got to remember, this was back in the days when the computer took up the whole desk, right? You didn't take your computer down to the dinner table with you, right? This was in the early to mid 90s, right? And so I'm thinking about it. My heart sinks. And after dinner, I went back to the computer to look at it, and I looked carefully. And I realized I printed out the wrong variable. If I remember correctly, in QBasic, you didn't need to initialize variables. And if you didn't initialize them, they started out at 0. And I printed out a variable that was completely, I misspelled, or I used the wrong letter or something like that. And when I corrected it, the computer said 5,050. And I got so excited that the computer was in a different room from my bedroom. Remember, this is back in the days when computers were huge. And I went back to my bedroom to jump on my bed to celebrate. And when I did that, I broke the spring in the bed. But I wasn't too unhappy about that. We kept that mattress for many years, and every time I got to the place where there was like a spring that kind of poked out at you, it gave me a warm, fuzzy memory of the first computer program I ever wrote. And I remember it just seemed like magic because of how fast it was, right? When I was a kid and I was adding up the numbers from 1 to 100 as sort of an exercise, right? It took like an hour. Oftentimes there would be a mistake and it didn't work out. Or I remember we would go on a road trip, or not even a road trip, but just a very long commute. And I would be constantly scribbling away and writing in the car. And it drove my mom crazy because I distinctly remember one time we were in the car. I think I was 6 years old at the time. My mom was trying to show me something, just a minor life lesson. Like, for example, I think she was driving and she wanted me to take a look at various landmarks, a little bit of a history lesson maybe. And all I was talking about was 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. Drove my mom crazy, if I remember correctly. But she screamed at me. She meant good. She wanted me to learn something else besides how to add up all the numbers from 1 to 100 without making a mistake. So I did that on the computer when I was 7 years old. When I was 9 years old, I remember one of the first things I ever got fascinated with QBasic was drawing stuff on the screen. I had downloaded a program online. This guy had written, I believe it was something like Pac-Man. There were a lot of drawings and lines and dots. And I took the source code and I looked at I basically took the code and copied one line at a time to see which line of code corresponded to drawing what on the screen. And I used that to draw all sorts of stuff. And I wrote a tic-tac-toe program. It was a very dumb program. It didn't have any AI in it. All it did was draw lines and circles and X's, and just to be able to make use of all the drawing lines and all that stuff that I learned. And I remember I spent about 2 weeks. You gotta remember, this was back in the day when you didn't take your computer everywhere, right? So I spent a few hours every day at the computer writing all the different cases that the tic-tac-toe board could be. And it was like a brute force, right? And finally I got it to run. And it was around Christmas time. My family had some friends over, and that's all I wanted to brag about. And again, my mom got pretty upset. I was 9 years old. She wanted me to mingle with the others, gain some social skills. All I wanted to talk about was tic-tac-toe, QBasic, and again, she couldn't get my attention with everything else, right? It was kind of like when I was 6 years old, sitting in the car scribbling numbers in a notebook, right? I drove my mom crazy. So that was that, and I didn't write another game. Well, when I was 14 years old, I learned about how to calculate pi to lots and lots of digits. And I wrote a program to calculate pi to, I believe, 1,000,000 digits. It was pretty far away from the world record. And I thought for sure it wasn't correct. I went online to look for 1,000,000 digits of pi. And sure enough, I got all the digits right. I think I used the arctangent formula, the power series expansion for arctangent, and pi equals arctangent of certain fractions added together. It's 4 times arctangent of 1, but that series converges very slowly. I think you have to use other angles to get it to converge fast, if I remember it correct. It's been a very long time since I've done any of that. I do want to get involved with calculating pi again when I get access to some supercomputing power. I have some ideas on how to do that, but it seemed just like magic after I had written it all out. I remember drove my mom crazy. I remember we had gone on vacation to Yosemite in California. My uncle, one of my uncles, lives in San Jose. We had visited him, and then we took a trip to Yosemite. And the whole time, all I wanted to talk about was calculating pi. Drove my mom crazy. And she couldn't get my attention on anything else. I remember by this time, we were starting to have less and less family time. I mean, I was going to college part-time, and then when I was off of school, all I wanted to do was calculate pi, write computer games. At one point, I got fascinated with another math problem called Ramsey theory, and drove my mom crazy. And all of this year, 2020, all I want to talk about is looking at Jupiter and Saturn in conjunction, right? And my mom wants me to go home to my family. All my work I'm doing right now is remote, and my mom wants me to go home to my family. But I realized that I haven't been practicing a very good hygiene compared to the rest of my family, and I don't want to be responsible for all that could go wrong. And given how convenient Zoom is, it just seems more effort than it's worth. But this is the kind of behavior I've had since I was a kid. I get so fixated on games, on whatever scientific stuff I'm doing, I forget about the practical stuff in life. When I attended my first computer Olympiad 7 years ago now, 2013. At the time, I read about how AlphaGo had used neural networks, and I wrote my first neural network. And the very first time I wrote it, I was going to try it out for tic-tac-toe first, but I wrote half of that program and I realized tic-tac-toe is too boring for me. I decided to write it for Kyoto Shogi as my first case study, if you will. And when I played against it, I couldn't believe how strong it was. Much stronger than the Monte Carlo tree search method that I had used at my first Computer Olympiad. And it just seemed like magic to me. It was good. All these things seemed like magic to me. What else have I done that seemed like magic? Earlier on, during the COVID-19 outbreak, I was trying to look for chlorine bleach at the grocery store, and my roommate couldn't find it either, and he knew that I loved chemistry and I love all sorts of science topics, and he half jokingly suggested, "Why don't you just go make some?" And I read online about, I knew about electrolysis, but I remember as a kid, I did electrolysis of sodium chloride and I got sodium chlorate. I didn't get sodium hypochlorite bleach. And so I went digging online about that. And sure enough, you need to keep the solution in an ice bath for it to work. And as a test case, I had a pair of socks that had holes in them anyway. And I put some of the homemade bleach on it to see how well it would work. And sure enough, it bleached it. So it also seemed like magic to me. I love it when something I don't have any confidence in, just like magic, it works. And it was good. I have chemical sensitivity, and the homemade bleach actually doesn't bother me as much as the commercial bleach. I think it's all the other crap that they add to commercial bleach that triggers me. So I've been making homemade bleach to use around the house, just so my roommates don't get the commercial bleach to use. Thanks for watching.